Hello and welcome to the 2020 edition of the Amperu Experience. We had our welcome back episode last week, and we're going to start into a block of episodes with this episode today doing a formal, not deconstruction, but formal criticism of the Disney sequel trilogy. Jeff and Kevin and I have all had a chance to spend quite a bit of time since the beginning of the show, which technically coincided with the premiere of The Force Awakens for all intents and purposes. We obviously have an episode that, gives our feelings on The Force Awakens when it first came out without the Last Jedi or the Rise of Skywalker to flavor our perspective.
That was our debut, I think, episode.
I believe it was, yeah. Since then, The Last Jedi has come and gone. Solo has come and gone. The Mandalorian has, the first season has come and gone. And The Rise of Skywalker has come out. And because of the coronavirus quarantine that's currently going on, the Disney Corporation decided that they would release The Rise of Skywalker early on digital. So even though I only got a chance to see it once in the theater, I've had 4 opportunities to watch The Rise of Skywalker now, partially in preparation for this episode, and also partially because I like The Rise of Skywalker, and we will get to what I mean by that exactly. I'm not trying to be cynical, but it is kind of hard to explain because I do, in fact, like The Rise of Skywalker, even though I do not like the Disney trilogy. But there's obviously more nuance to that statement, and it's going to take 3 full episodes of us doing this criticism to fully understand. We're going to work off of my notes to give ourselves sort of a format and backbone to work from. We've given ourselves some ground rules, not the least of which are that we're not going to scream and yell about Kathleen Kennedy or Bob Iger or J.J. Abrams and try to comment on them as who we think they might be as people, because that would be silly and ad hominem attack that we're not capable of making appropriately. So we're going to do as my favorite Star Wars talking head, Joseph Scrimshaw, has encouraged us all to do, which is to engage with the material presented. So with that being said, we're going to start talking about The Force Awakens. I have my likes listed first, and then my dislikes listed second, and we're just going to take a couple of minutes on each of those points. And
Go
ahead.
Before we get started, I made a point to Ed in the car that I want to reiterate that I think sort of bears repeating. I think that in '99, when The Phantom Menace came out, everyone was expecting something like The Force Awakens. It was like something that was very familiar to the OT. And I think in 2015, when The Force Awakens came out, everyone was expecting something in the same vein as The Phantom Menace, like something that felt like a departure from the old.
And I agreed with that. Surprisingly. Not surprisingly that I agreed with it, but I'm surprised at how quickly the point that he made sort of solidified in my mind. And I went, oh, shit, yeah, you're right.
Do you think that at that time people would have been more receptive to anything so long as it was taking place after what we had already seen rather than before?
I mean, perhaps the general audience, but I can tell you that one of the things that my friends and I had the most excitement talking about when I was in middle school, which was only a couple of years prior to episode 1 coming out, and just maybe a year or 2 prior, or maybe when I was in 8th grade, or when the special editions came out. But either way, I remember very distinctly talking with my friend Jeff Caldwell and Chris Miller about the backstory of how Darth Vader became Darth Vader And the thing that my friends and I were the most excited about with the prequels being made was the potential to see the battle where Darth Vader becomes Darth Vader. And what we meant by that was what we now know as the famous high ground scene. The way that my friends and I had envisioned it initially involved them fighting over like a bridge with a pit of lava,
Same here.
or perhaps something more likened to the way the Jack Nicholson Joker became the Joker.
Same here. That's why I envisioned it.
Yeah, like some sort of suspension bridge over lava. So the fact that it was the way that George did it, that's just how it ended up. But in my middle school brain, the thing that my friends and I were the most pumped about was the potential to see Obi-Wan as a full-blown Jedi, Anakin as a full-blown Jedi, and then them fighting and Darth Vader becoming Darth Vader. So we weren't as necessarily interested in finding out what happened after the Battle of Endor as we were about. I was genuinely excited about finding out Darth Vader's backstory. Now, where the rubber meets the road there is where everybody wanted Anakin's starting age to be. Some people are perfectly okay with him being a 9-year-old, myself included. Some people prefer him to be closer to the age that he was in Attack of the Clones, but wish that had been his episode 1 Anakin so that we could have skipped the little kid stuff. That's just personal opinion, and I don't think that should necessarily affect how you view the prequels in their entirety. But if they do, I don't know. You're probably
there's something. I think there's something that people don't forget, and assuming you have a problem with where they chose to start Anakin's journey, that's totally fair. But I think you can't get the development that we've gotten from Obi-Wan without taking it back that far for Anakin.
I make a point in a prequel defense essay that I wrote, and this will be the last. This will be my last word on it until we get into the main topic. But I wrote in a prequel defense essay that Anakin's portrayal in Episode 1, as it was so essential because of one line. I had a dream I was a Jedi once. I came back and I freed all the slaves. The contrast between expectation and reality of Anakin becoming a Jedi and putting up with all the bureaucracy is pretty essential to fully flesh out why he fell to the dark side.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah,
and I hadn't really thought of that way. That's a really good scene to pick out.
Yeah,
because I think that you'll never no matter how how idealistic you are in your youth, you'll never be as idealistic and full of hope as you are as a child.
Yeah,
and I think that you have to take it back to that primordial sense of innocence to fully grasp how far Vader fell.
And there's an old saying that a cynic is just an optimist that's been overly educated. Like, I think Anakin was just beaten down by cynicism, like, because he had to put up with so much bureaucracy, and that was part of the reason why he was open to the dark side. Anyway, so
while all this is going on, we also have the Phantom Menace on in the background. There's the Maz Kanata doll with the subtitles on. So we're going to be talking about Episode 7. We're going to be referencing the OT, as we always do, quite a bit, because that is always going to be the backbone of the Star Wars movies, the original trilogy, obviously. And then from there, we should be able to tie things together so that we don't stray too far from the main topic, but still do our usual, the Aunt Beru experience, occasional, occasional banter that goes down a rabbit hole. But let's get started. So the first thing that I like in The Force Awakens. Now, again, if there are parts of The Force Awakens, because I am going to go as chronologically as I can, if there are things that I seemingly skip over, it's because, at least at this particular moment, I'm ambivalent towards them. So the first thing that I like is Rey's entrance.
And I agree.
Right? Because the opening crawl was a little iffy. And I was thinking about this earlier, and I said to myself, had I not done what I did the last few movies and go on Star Wars leaks as early as humanly possible to find out what the potential storyline is, I might have been more shocked to read in the opening crawl that Luke Skywalker had disappeared, because one of the things that was leaked very early before the movie premiered was that the end scene was Rey meeting Luke on Ahch-To and handing him a lightsaber. And then at that point, there was all kinds of speculation that people were still thinking he was Luke's daughter, or she was Luke's daughter, and that when she saw him, he would in fact speak, which he didn't, and that he was going to say, "My baby girl," or something of that nature. That obviously didn't happen, but nonetheless, it led me to knowing well ahead of time that Luke Skywalker was not going to be in Episode 7, and that prepared me mentally for the opening crawl, which just confirmed what the leaks had said, which was that Luke was not going to be in the movie because he had in fact vanished. So the very first thing that I liked, that I really got into the movie with, was Rey's entrance.
So I'm gonna build off that, and I'm gonna take it one step further. As someone who, I think everyone knows that the sequel trilogy is very much soured on me. That said, I think Rey's intro is the best in all of Star Wars. I think without even saying a line, you know pretty much who she is, her daily routine, and how long she's been stuck on Jakku. Like, you know what she does every day, like without even saying a word, and that I think is very impressive. Now, I think because of that, she had a lot of potential, and I think where that potential goes down the tubes as a character is on Starkiller Base, where she mind tricks the stormtrooper, because up until that point you were just getting to know her as a character, and then when she mind tricks a stormtrooper so easily, all you think of is, okay, who is she? Where did she come from? And who could she possibly be related to? That scene, I think, squandered a lot of the potential that the intro set up. Just my opinion.
Yeah. Kevin, your thoughts?
You're both bringing up good points, and I would just say a few things because I am trying to be more positive, and I think that's overall been healthy for me in terms of my relationship to these movies. I not only rewatched my episode 7 in preparation for this podcast, I watched the video that I recorded immediately following the first viewing of episode 7 when I saw it with you and Jeff. I think you were there when we I think we all saw it together. I'm not sure. I know I saw it with Jeff.
You saw it with Jeff, and then you played your reaction for us.
Yeah.
I saw it with my brother and Bryn.
Yeah. It was insane. Actually, no, I think I saw it with Jeff. Could you tell me, did I see it with you first, or I think I might have seen it with my brother.
Episode 7?
No, you saw it with your brother second.
No, yeah, I saw it. It was a long time ago, gang. I saw it with Jeff, and it was one of the most nostalgic, pleasant experiences I'd had in years. To the point where I needed to bottle up how I felt as a sort of time capsule, in case it almost as if to save that moment, in whatever way I could. And I'm really glad I did, because obviously we all feel differently about all the movies, good or bad, than when we first saw them. You know, I think we could all agree that we were very much on board with everything and loved everything in episode 7 right when it came out. And I'm glad I saved. Yeah.
I definitely felt very positive about it. I remember how positive I was. And to be perfectly honest, I still like the movie. And again, without getting into a whole thing where we talk about the other movies, because this is supposed to be specifically about episode 7 today, the unfortunate truth is that episode 8 affects my ability to enjoy episode 7. And at this point, do I think that episode 9 helps me?
Sorry, Calamity. They just got pissed off. Okay.
To enjoy episode 7 again? Like, can I watch 9 and then go back and watch 7 and not be bothered about some of the things that get drastically changed in episode 8? Yes, but again, you can't erase episode 8 from your mind, as well as the fact that we're going to do a criticism of episode 8, and there are plenty of things.
Real quick, I need to interrupt you. Let's just not talk about episode 8. Like, and I because I wanted to. Is that Calamity?
No,
that was Jeff creating a calamity.
Sorry, I was just trying to.
No worries. I think it's important, and that's something I realized immediately. Right, even when we just got to Jakku. Something I had to do in order to go into this movie with more positivity is I had to essentially pretend not to know where these plot points went. And I think that's what episode 7 does better than anything else. It presents you with tantalizing possibilities. It presents you with very charismatic. It presents you with very charismatic and fascinating people that you are immediately endeared to. You're with Poe a very small amount of time, and you already are rooting for this guy to fucking take it to Vader. I was really worried that I'd constantly be comparing these characters to their OT counterparts the whole time, and I was so taken away with everything that I was like, Poe Dameron. He's Poe Dameron, the pilot, man.
Here's the thing, though. I specifically didn't put Poe's entrance because I was not as keen on the whole joking with his mask on thing.
I don't like that either. It totally ruins the tone of the scene. Like imagine when
a man just died.
Yeah, that too.
Imagine in episode 4 when Vader first shows up, because that's clearly the scene is trying to mirror. Where Vader is wringing that guy's neck, the rebel trooper's neck, and the trooper being choked is making gags while no pun intended, gags while he's being choked.
He was choking Captain Antilles.
Yeah, and I think Mahler had a really great fix for that scene that maintains the same spirit and gets the same message across about Poe. Just put it in the interrogation scene when he's on the...
Yes, 100%. I remember when Mahler made that point now, and I remember agreeing with it then, too. The joking should have been when they were stuck alone together, not in front of a crowd full of not townspeople, but...
acolytes, clerics,
the Church of the Force goers that were all rounded up because they were going to be summarily executed as soon as Kylo Ren reboarded his ship. So, yeah, there was some odd stuff about that. But either way, my first point that we've already talked about, Rey's entrance, is universally accepted as probably the best part of the first third of the movie. If anything, it's the key to the cynical Star Wars viewer letting the movie in a little bit and actually getting on board. Mm-hmm. Like, it was the first thing that I was like, okay, all right. Like the whole the AT-AT thing, and again, like Jeff said, like, everything about how long she's been there, what she does, what she gets up to, all without dialogue, and then John Williams' music is just brilliant.
What I think is great that the scene accomplishes that I didn't think any scene could accomplish is it made me forget about Tatooine for a moment. And what I mean by that is obviously if I told you in a vacuum that we're going to open on a desert planet and our main protagonist is, bored and has wanderlust from being on a desert planet, you'd be insane not to immediately go, oh, they're just ripping off episode 1 or episode 4.
Well, that's basically what they did.
Yeah, no, yes, but the way they brought us into the world, the way they brought us into Rey's daily routine, it made me think, yeah, like there's other desert planets and people live on them. That's the beauty of it. It made me think, yeah, this is like just another desert planet that people live on, and I'm past that barrier, that very obvious first barrier of the nostalgia. That got me through, and obviously I'm not going to say the movie successfully did that with every beat it was copying, but in terms of just bringing us to a desert planet where our protagonist has wanderlust, it's successfully through cinematography, very close personal shots, and great set pieces, I think, and also a lot of very subtle acting on Daisy Ridley's part. Yeah. It brought us into her world in a way that made me think, yeah, like I'm not going to fucking worry about it. It's a desert planet. Desert planets are cool. I'm just here to follow this new person.
Also, when she rode her speeder bike off into the sunset effectively, and the down Star Destroyer was in the background. Gorgeous shot.
The one note I actually made was just in this like thing that I only realized just now is that scene where she's like got a piece of scrap metal and she rides it down the hill to her speeder bike. That's the first time I ever thought, oh man, she had to walk that? Shit. She had to go up that hill by foot? Damn it, that sucks. And she had to do all that internal shit. Man, that sucks. Well, it might be because I did squats the other day that I'm just thinking, oh shit, that's gonna kill her lower body, and I'm like, I feel for her more.
Oh yeah, it definitely gives some framework to what kind of an athlete you're dealing with. Because if she had to trudge her ass up there, going uphill on a 40-degree angle on a sand dune in Uggs, because that's what it appears she's wearing. All right, so perfect. Second thing that I like, Kylo Ren's entrance. I like his mask. I like the music. I like his lightsaber. I like the quippy one-liner to Lor Santeca before he cuts him in half. Mm-hmm. And then I like the fact that he freezes a laser bolt in midair. Mm-hmm. Now, we already just talked about what I don't like about that scene, which is the Poe Dameron exchange with him. But we already decided that we're in agreement that Mauler had the best idea for how to adjust that whole thing, which was making the scene a little more tense when it was down on Jakku, and then leave the comedy for when Kylo Ren says, oh, you're the best pilot in the Resistance. And that would be a perfect time for Poe to be like, I can't even understand you. Can you take your mask off?
See, another reason why I didn't like that scene, that line, it reminds me of Spaceballs where Dark Helmet's like, I can't breathe in this thing.
Yeah, well, the Spaceballs references, I think, are maybe made a little too heavy-handed in certain places, to the point where I think that people making the movie were saying to each other, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we fit a Spaceballs reference in here? I mean, it seems that on the nose in certain circumstances, but either way, I like Kylo Ren's entrance. Third thing I like the aesthetic of the updated Stormtroopers.
I don't like it. I think it looks kind of silly with the fucking like chin strap beard going through the mask, and I don't know. I just think like
okay. Kevin,
hang on one second. Ed, Jeff, you can continue for a bit. I'm going to try something.
Now I know the theme of this episode isn't what you would have done differently. However, what I would have done differently, I don't like how the First Order is just. They fumble back and forth between you're led to believe that the First Order is this like rogue faction, but all of a sudden they're better funded and are better armed and better manned than the New Republic, which I think is this weird it's a weird narrative inconsistency. I
Okay,
think
now, Jeff, just because, okay, in case we decide to go audio only, I pulled up on the screen just a standard shot of the New Order stormtroopers,
yep.
and I think it would be good of us to really analyze what we're looking at here, and we also have a standard image of a regular old school
Yeah.
trooper.
So I think what they should have done, they should have made the First Order. They should have kept with that they are a small rogue faction, and they should have made the aesthetic of the stormtroopers that of the stormtroopers we see in The Mandalorian. These like dirty, dinged up guys who have clearly been hiding for a while.
I would say I have this. I have one, and it's only because I'm looking at it right now. Just because I used to think I was kind of set in my opinion on New Order stormtroopers. I actually think there's not. I understand what they were going for, but I think that they went a little too smooth with everything. Sort of like what Jeff said. I like how even clone troopers helmets and armor had a little bit more going on, like visually. I think they stripped a lot of that away. I like the flow of the helmet though, and that's what saves the design for me. I like how the face flows into the mouth, and you get the sense that there is technology, there is breathing equipment in the sort of in the chin strap that Jeff was saying, and they kept a lot of the essence of the old school helmet. But I do think that there's something to be said for. I would have liked to see a return to the colors that they felt comfortable using in the prequels. You know, in terms of their troopers.
I agree too. There should be more class variation.
Yeah, and also it helps with organization. You know, like what someone's color means. You know, Cody was captain, and that meant he wore yellow, right? Or
Commander, he wore yellow.
Commander, right?
Rex was captain.
Rex was Captain Rex, obviously. My apologies, Captain Rex. Yeah, so that's where I'm sort of at with the troopers. I think that they could have gone and made them a little bit more busier. I like some of the ridges and the hard edges in the old trooper design, just because it felt like that's something that could more feasibly exist. This seems like it's breaking a little too into sci-fi, which sounds weird given what we're talking about. I don't know. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, well,
I think Jeff, I think Ed wanted to talk.
Sorry, but
no worries.
Yeah, but I lost what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
I think Kevin. Actually accidentally may have touched upon an important point here, where he says it feels too sci-fi, because Star Wars isn't sci-fi; it's space fantasy. Like, there's no talk of like how the gravity works on ships. It just works. If you want sci-fi, watch Star Trek, and they'll get into the minutia and the physics of how everything works.
Okay, well, Ed, tell us real quick. Ed, tell us your initial thoughts that you wanted to say on the trooper design.
Well, more so than getting into the semantics of, like the detail for detail comparisons, I thought that the feel of them was very Stormtrooper, but I did like the updates. And I thought the introduction of them in terms of the flickering lights inside the lander with the red lights and the flickering was a very cool way to introduce them. But just in general, I just like how they look. I mean, I grew up with the classic ones. I prefer the classic ones, but I like the aesthetic of the First Order Stormtroopers.
Yeah.
I also like the Sith Troopers. Like, they don't.
Yeah, they're basically just red stormtroopers,
but I mean, like, the difference in how they do the helmets, and then the whole like the ribbed chest piece and stuff. There's just certain aspects of it that I just think are neat. I mean, that's all Star Wars is, right? Yeah. It's just whether or not you'd want to buy the character on the movie screen as an action figure, or at least that's what it is for me. And I bought a lot of First Order action figures.
Now, building on that, I will say, I think Phasma looks really cool. I think Captain Phasma looks awesome.
That is the other reason I like the First Order Stormtrooper, because the aesthetic of the First Order Stormtrooper is cool, but Phasma is fucking awesome. And she is probably, you know what? I'm going to go out and say she's the biggest disappointment of, at the very least, The Force Awakens, if not of the entire sequel trilogy. And that's only because I don't hold the sequel trilogy in any level of regard where we're having a serious conversation about like characters that touched my heart. As far as characters that I thought initially were going to be awesome and then turned out to be absolutely nothing, and it kills me because the aesthetic was so cool, Phasma. But we'll get to Phasma with some other stuff as well.
Before we exit the troopers, I just thought it would be cool to get your both of you guys' opinion on some of the new trooper weapons that we saw. You know, the traitorous, the spinny electric
stick?
The whoppity stick. Yeah, like it was sort of a meme for a while, but how did you guys like seeing that sort of variance?
The whole point of that scene is just to set up is just to serve as a semi-plausible setup for Finn kind of holding his own against Kylo Ren on Starkiller Base. That's it. It's just meant to show that Finn had some melee combat training at some point.
Yeah. Now, they should have gone further with that whole thing, and I believe that's in my notes later on. But for those of you who did the journey to, in terms of every sequel movie had a Journey to series of comics and books. One of the Journey to the Force Awakens books that came out was I think it's a junior reader, called Before the Awakening, and it's three main stories about what was going on in the lives of Rey, Finn, and Poe just prior to the events of The Force Awakens. And Poe's story is pretty cut and dry. It's basically him on a Republic X-Wing mission where he encounters something about, there's like a Republic senator that's taking money from the First Order to... It was some political espionage story that involved Poe recognizing the true danger of the First Order as an entity, because at that point he was just a Republic pilot who was doing a job and thing. The other two stories, the one about Finn, points out that he is extremely gifted in all of the simulation training that he does. And the person that he gets into the actual whoppity stick fight with in The Force Awakens is his former squad mate, who kind of always had a chip on his shoulder that Finn would score better. And then at the same time, this is the guy that wouldn't help the black sheep of the group because he was too worried about himself. And then the black sheep of the squad that Finn was in is ultimately the stormtrooper who gets shot and then rubs his bloody handprint across Finn's helmet. So what you don't get told about the stormtrooper interaction is that the stormtrooper that dies, that rubs his hand on Finn's mask, is specifically Finn's friend, his squad mate. The guy that he gets into the whoppity stick fight with is specifically Finn's old squad mate, who sees him, calls him a traitor, and then gets in the whoppity stick fight. I still personally think that would have been a much better opportunity, regardless of a junior reader novel. If you're going to break canon as far as making a book irrelevant, it should have been specifically Phasma who went to bat for Finn initially, because you recognize that at the beginning of the movie, she sort of tries to protect Finn in a weird way. Like you think that they have some sort of relationship almost, like as pals beyond the battlefield, with the way she kind of protects him from the reconditioning thing.
Actually, I'm only saying this now. Do you think that that Phasma as a whole would have been made more interesting had she tried to be compassionate with Finn once she corners him after their
Well,
firefight.
I think she showed the equivalent of compassion. Like, I think she knew full well
Stern
that
forgiveness.
I think she knew full well that Finn didn't pull the trigger, and she thought that it would be easier to just give him another chance than to send him back to reconditioning, which we might find out in, extra literature that it was, particularly brutal, or maybe they like gave you a lobotomy or something horrifying. Either way, having Phasma show him compassion initially, and then halfway through the movie when they invade Takodana, she spots him and then kicks the shit out of him, where Han has to save him from her, but because she's wearing chromium armor, when he shoots her, it like blasts her backwards, but it doesn't kill her, but they have a chance to run away. That would have been a cool way to use them.
Now, this is also touching upon an issue that I have with A, The Force Awakens, but B, the sequel trilogy as a whole. It relies so damn much on the books and comics to explain things that they just don't want to explain.
Yeah, like it shouldn't be necessary that I read that book to know that the reason why Rey can fly the Falcon is because she had taken simulator training parts out of crashed Star Destroyers.
Yeah.
So that she could basically play video games, which were in actuality flight simulators of all the major starships, starfighters, and freighters throughout the galaxy, because that was something that apparently they had for their in-house pilot training when pilots were stationed on a Star Destroyer.
Yeah.
It just seems like a little too much information for even a hardcore Star Wars nerd to have to compile prior to a movie. Or at the very least, there should have been extra dialogue in the conversation between Poe or between Finn and Daisy or Rey following the TIE fighter chase on Jakku. When he says, "How did you do that?" and she says, "I don't know." In that case, it's meant to imply that, the Force intervened. But if you had a little bit of expository dialogue where she was like, I've done that 1,000 times in simulators, but I've never actually taken off in the thing, like anything would have made that easier to swallow.
I have an even easier solution. Have her not be the pilot. And this might be a bit much, but I think, we know Poe did, we know by this point, due to context clues and things that were said by Kylo to Poe during their interrogation, Poe is the best pilot in the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
I think based on that, you could afford BB-8 a certain level of he's an advanced droid. We haven't seen this type of droid before. Maybe he is able to fly the Falcon. And we have Finn, maybe he got injured, or maybe Rey got injured during the trek to get there, and she's incapacitated, and Finn has to be on the gun, and she's providing more. I understand what it does for Finn and Rey, but I'm saying that moment, it could have given more shine to Poe and BB-8, and then she's like, "That you guys were amazing." Because by this point, she's already done some impressive stuff. She's defended herself from the guys that were trying to attack her. She successfully, finds the ship, and I think giving her some breathing room and, setting her aside for a second and saying, all right, now she's, there's no real reason that she would know how to fly a ship. That would be a great subversion. You think, oh, the plucky kid from Tatooine always knows how to pilot ships better than anybody. Nope, she has no idea. She's lived in a ground-based vehicle in the remains of a ground unit for her whole life. She knows how to fight on the ground. This is not her shtick.
So
I think just don't give her the ability to fly. Then it's she's out of her depth, and she's also in space. This is a lot for her. And maybe have her freak out because she's like, "Finn, you know what you're doing, right?" And he's like, yeah. And maybe BB-8's helping him. I don't know.
So I have no problem with her flying the Falcon because there are prior characters that can do that well. My issue with Rey has always been she fuses Luke's moral. She she's a fusion of the power that we see in Anakin in the prequels with Luke's incorruptibility in the OT together, and that's why she's not a good character. If you're going to make her very powerful and very skilled, cool, but you got to give her some sort of moral weakness. Or if you're going to make her incorruptible, then you've got to have her get the crap kicked out of her by some Tusken Raiders, have her hand get chopped off by Darth Vader, and so on and so forth. You can't have both.
Okay.
That said,
No, go ahead.
That said, I think the way we fixed that scene, even though this isn't really a fixing thing, is you have some way to have Finn meet back up with Poe at the outpost, and because they both crash landed on Jakku, and then Poe flies the Falcon away. That fixes two problems with the sequel trilogy. It's got the main trio all meeting up very early in the sequel trilogy, and not at the end of the second movie. And B, it shows that yes, Poe is a damn good pilot, and since you always need two people to fly the Falcon, Rey can be the co-pilot, and Poe can even comment say hey, Poe can even say you're a damn good pilot or something like that.
Okay, so that was one of our patented left turns off of.
Sorry about that.
No. It's just what we do here at the Emperor Experience, because that was all off of me liking the Stormtrooper aesthetic. So something else that I like in The Force Awakens, I like the updated original trilogy vehicles. And I'll say this. I said this in the car to Jeff. I think that if we're going to actually treat the sequel trilogy with any level of reverence in terms of its ability to keep canon going appropriately, it's possible that in the 30 years since the Battle of Endor and the creation of the Republic, that with the Empire being the establishment that it was, there needed to be quite a lot of separation of commerce from the government, right? So one of the things that's going to have to go through a lot of changes are the major corporations that make the weapons and that make the ships. So the potential that with all of the tumult that came as a result of the collapse of the Empire and the rise of the New Republic, maybe the technology slowed down a little bit. Maybe you didn't get as much innovation. So 30 years later, the fact that, especially with the Republic attempting to demilitarize to a large degree, that you ended up with basically an updated X-Wing. Mm-hmm. Maybe the capital ships are basically still Mon Calamari cruisers, because why, if it ain't broke, why fix it? The TIE fighters, as far as the First Order being, the whole what if the Nazis had fled to Argentina and then they still had all of the plans from when they were still in power. So they just did their best to update the things that they had when they were winning. And that's where the updated TIE fighters came from, the updated Star Destroyers, et cetera, et cetera. Now, obviously, we all know that was just Disney's opportunity to take the classic aesthetic that we were all looking for and then giving it a little bit of a polish and then reintroducing it to us. But did it do its intended job? Yes, it did. I like the aesthetic of the new X-Wing. Mm-hmm. I like the aesthetic of the new TIE Fighter. I like the aesthetic of the new Star Destroyers. The only thing that I had an issue with is that, and this has nothing to do with the bombers in The Last Jedi, I was curious why there were only X-Wings. But I figured that that would get resolved, later on, which technically in episode 9 it did.
There was every ship and then some.
Yeah, if you like a ship, it was in episode 9.
Oh my god! I just realized that means there were the fighters with hyperspace rings in episode 9.
Probably.
Oh dang, that's cool.
Well, because you got to figure though, if you're thinking about the Star Wars universe realistically, think about it like cars. Lower income or maybe less prosperous areas are probably going to be full of droids and vehicles that are a generation prior that were sold off, and instead of being sold off for scrap, they basically became like used cars. So there's probably whole planets that are full of Clone Wars era ships and vehicles and droids because it's like a...
Didn't they cover that in Rebels? Wasn't there like an episode of Rebels where there was like some drone that was like still programmed or something?
Yeah, I mean, there's always stories here and there where you find out that there's junk planets that have all this stuff sitting on them. There's the whole... wasn't the initial storyline of Fallen Order that the hiding Jedi was on a planet that basically was like a reclamation yard?
Yeah. It was a repo center for all of the Clone Wars, like basically accoutrement and technology.
Exactly. So the updated vehicles, I'm into. That there doesn't really need a lot to go into that. I like X-Wings and TIE Fighters. I was happy to see them back. I thought the updates were adequate.
Didn't George say he kind of had a problem with didn't George comment that there was like something about like the vehicle, like he felt? Didn't George say he felt there'd be more innovation, like more technological innovation in that?
Yes,
like
that was one of the reasons why he referred to it as a retro movie. But he also said that he understood that was one of the things that they were looking to do to re-engage with the audience. Mm-hmm. He personally would have designed more innovation into the Star Wars universe 30 years beyond the Battle of Endor. But I also think that we would have been dealing with a vastly different story from George, and we're not going to get into that because that would literally be a whole separate episode that comes out of me saying I like the updated aesthetic of the classic OT vehicles. So here's the next point. Starkiller Base. I mostly like Starkiller Base. Now, Kevin asked me about this the other day. The main point is that, once again, if we're trying to stay in terms of like what I like about the continuation of canon, and as a Star Wars nerd, what do I like? I like the fact that the planet Ilum, which was traditionally used as the planet that Jedi Padawans go to collect their Kyber crystal on, was turned into a mega weapon by the First Order as a result of them taking the plans that had been put into place initially by the Empire, because the plan for Starkiller Base was originally mentioned in the list of projects that Jyn Erso is talking about when she's looking for the Death Star project. So they had plans to expand on the idea of the Death Star even back into the original trilogy. So again, you have to think about it from the realistic standpoint of the first Death Star gets blown up. Well, what do? We build another one and we make it bigger. Another one gets blown up. This time, instead of starting from scratch and building an exoskeleton and then building a gun into it, let's take a fucking planet, and if the core of the planet is made out of the material that is the main power generator for the gun from the original gigantic weapon we made, maybe we can turn an entire planet into basically a gigantic ready-to-go Death Star. To a degree, I kind of think that idea is cool.
And you also you appreciate that they kept the flora and fauna of the planet intact, like like trees, forests, vegetation, weather. It was an ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of like the final battle that was just outside the Precinct 47 oscillator, where they're running around in the woods,
Mhm.
they basically just took the planet Ilum and then plugged in what they needed in the essential areas. So like only the front third is dug out to have that like trench. It's not the trench because the trench doesn't run across the meridian; it runs lengthwise. Um, and then obviously the big gun, like that big red eye, and then the oscillator, which is for all intents and purposes several hundred miles from the actual main location of Starkiller, but that's what was meant to keep the whole planet from shaking to pieces when it draws the power of the nearest sun to it. They were just, I don't know, I just thought Starkiller was cool. I thought that it was used well. The issue that I have with it is what happens when it shoots the gun, what the result of the gun shooting does to the story, and then the fact that the end battle is a combination of the episode 4 battle with the episode 6 battle, but it's just not that engaging.
Now, you kind of you kind of grazed upon why I don't like Starkiller Base. Basically, what I was hoping for at some point was for us to see the New Republic and like it operating and things like that. I mean, um, just for us to get reintroduced into the world that was achieved by the Rebel Alliance, and that scene in less than a minute wipes out all the work done by the main characters of the original trilogy. And I'm going to equate this to a different trilogy. So basically, Star Wars at this point is a trilogy of trilogies. You know, more or less, right?
Yep.
And the most important one, whether is the OT because that was the first one. Now I'm going to equate this. I don't like the movie The Dark Knight Rises because it narratively negates what happened. The importance of the Dark Knight in that trilogy, and that's what Starkiller Base does with the OT in the trilogy of trilogies. It just sort of negates its overall narrative importance.
Yeah, the fact that Starkiller Base blows up the Republic basically wipes the game board clean.
Which is what they want to do to make reboots of the OT.
Which, in order to reboot the original trilogy in the way that they, for all intents and purposes, did, they needed to wipe clean all of the work that the Lucas era heroes did. So, Leia is on the outs with the government, which is why she's off site when they blow up. And everybody else in the government that we used to know, you would have had to have read in the
Bloodlines,
in Bloodlines and so forth, that they had retired and things of that nature. So even people who know Star Wars well enough to go, well, what about Mon Mothma? Well, Mon Mothma retired, and et cetera, et cetera. And the only connection that we get to the Republic at all is the shot of right before they get nuked, when you see the young female who was Princess Leia's personal aide, who we get no.
She had gone there to warn them.
Yeah, and that scene was deleted, so we basically have no context for why we focus on this young this young female wearing what we realize is a resistance uniform before they get vaporized. So, although I like Starkiller, I don't like what Starkiller did. So it's a double-edged sword, which is why I'm only going through these things point by point. I don't like everything about Starkiller, but am I unhappy that a third bigger Death Star got made? Not really. I initially thought the idea of Starkiller Base was cool. The fact that the fact that they were using it as a plot device to wipe the game board clean so that they could play with their new Disney characters without being impeded by the previous generation and all the work they had done, that was a little annoying.
Do you think if they had pointed the gun at and like destroyed planets that we knew, it would have felt more legitimate and real rather than
So two things. One, yes, if it had blown up Coruscant, it would have made more sense. And two, if it had blown up Coruscant in a way where the laser could be seen tearing through the fabric of time so that everybody could see the red laser beam as it shot across space, I just thought all that was really stupid. Because that was just a plot device so that Finn and Han and everybody on Takodana could see that Starkiller fired their weapon.
Yeah.
Like there is no functional reason that anybody on Maz's planet should have been able to see Starkiller fire at the Hosnian system if it weren't for the red laser beam tearing through the fabric of time or whatever they put in the visual dictionary.
Okay. Yeah, that was all I was wondering about.
Okay. So next thing that I like the Hux Space Hitler speech on Starkiller Base. I liked Hux as a character initially. I liked how mean he was. I liked how intense he was. I liked what at least initially appeared to me to be a continuation of the same type of character that you would get from an Imperial officer. I thought that they were trying to make him like a model Imperial officer. And then, of course, when you read the extra material, you find out that he was the son of an actual Imperial officer who, when the Empire fell, was sent to the unknown regions to help start the First Order. So he is a legacy Empire player. But then you find out that he conspired with Captain Phasma to kill his father because he hated his father, because in actuality he was
abusive.
The father was extremely abusive towards him, and it had something to do with the mother having him out of wedlock, or
I think we're talking about
we're talking about Hux. Like he wasn't actually Brendel Hux's son or something. There was something that made
like a bastard son.
Yeah, there was something that made the father dislike him and always mistreat him. So once he was old enough, he made a pact with Phasma to kill him, and that's why they technically like watched each other's backs.
Mm-hmm.
But that was something that never really manifested in any particular way in the movie. So nobody actually knew that. So outside of what happens to him in episode 8, I thought Hux was a cool character.
Hux is cool.
I thought he was gonna go.
His Hitler speech is dope.
The Hitler speech is cool, and I thought that.
That sounds really bad.
It sounds
so bad.
Everybody realizes that's listening to this show that clearly General Hux and the speech that he made at Starkiller Base was meant to elicit Space Hitler. So, with that being said, the next thing that I liked in particular was the Falcon chase on Jakku. Now, we already went over the point that you had to read the extra material to find out that the reason why Rey was able to fly the Falcon is because she had used a simulator, etc., etc. It was clearly implied in the movie itself, if you were watching the movie on its own, that the Force was the thing that was flowing through her and allowing her to navigate through the the junkyard of the Jakku battle, basically by a combination of the will of the Force combined with Rey's knowledge of all of the broken down ships. As far as just the scene itself, I just think it's awesome. I just think it's a cool scene. I think it was a good bonding moment for Rey and Finn. I think that I think the chase through the crash Super Star Destroyer, and then the thing where she does that engine stall where she bellies out, cool. And Finn's able to shoot the last TIE fighter, and then the TIE fighter crashes into an old TIE fighter as they fly away. It was just a cool scene.
Something that I love was the fact that there were scavengers like at the burning wreckage. Like they were ready for it. They're like, oh, fresh meat, chum in the water. We gotta go. That's like so many food packs.
So where I thought they were going with that is these are two young people who are discovering that they have the Force, and the Force is flowing through both of them, and they are discovering that they both have the ability to use the Force. I thought at some point it was going to be like there was going to be like a Star Wars Galaxies type moment. Did you ever play Star Wars Galaxies?
No.
Well, no. Essentially, when you get Force sensitive, you're visited by this old man character who gives you Jedi training. I didn't read any of the leaks, so I thought at some point an old man type character who was effectively Luke Skywalker's like contact out in the known galaxy would say, "Hey, you two, come with me," and Luke would come in at some point in the second or very early third act of the movie.
Interesting. So your opinion was flavored by the outside video game material.
Not so much that, just I thought they were gonna like do something similar to that. Like there was like I thought Luke was gonna have a contact on Takodana. He senses that Rey and Finn are both Force sensitive and urges them to go with him to meet Luke. And Han says, "Yeah, it's cool, go ahead," or something like that.
Okay. All right. So the next thing that I liked. Although I did not actually like the final battle on Starkiller, I do like the opening X-Wing TIE Fighter battle on Takodana when they fly in over the water.
That's one hell of a pilot.
And then we have the moment where we're cutting between the ground battle and the flying, where Finn and basically the entire crowd watches Poe take out, was it like 10 TIE fighters in a row?
That's cool.
And it was just great. I mean,
because we see that Poe's a good pilot.
Like, absolutely. Like it builds Poe's character. It also is just visually stunning. Obviously, it's a different perspective on watching X-Wings and TIE fighters dogfight because it's in atmosphere. And then on top of that, in the midst of the movie, Finn doesn't know that that's Poe, which is why he says that's a hell of a pilot.
Yeah.
Because at that point, he still thought that Poe had died on Takodana or on Jakku and had left him behind. So the fact that he was excited to see this pilot and then find out later that it was his buddy who he escaped from the Death Star or the Star Destroyer with was interesting for people who were genuinely interested in the movie. And then the final piece that I liked about the movie, and again, this also plays into the fact that I had read leaks. I knew the movie was going to be this way. And even though I knew it, I still thought that the scene was literally perfect. I remember audibly going like, "Oh man!" Like at the end of the movie, the first time I saw it, which was when Rey shows up on Octo with the cliffhanger ending, with Luke turning around, looking completely stoic, Jedi Master, full blown, with the robes on. He looked awesome. He was exactly what I thought Luke Skywalker should look like 30 years later as a Jedi Master. And I was so excited for episode 8 until episode 8 came out.
So
You
want to know what you want? You know that Rian Johnson requested Abrams change that scene, right?
Yes, he requested he change several things, not the least of which was disconnecting him to the Force, because one of the first things we were going to see when we saw Luke was him floating in midair, and then we were going to see like big rocks floating around something that he was meditating with.
Yep, which would have been really cool.
Would have been awesome. Instead, we got an angry old man.
Now, see, I think the cliffhanger ending is more indicative of the bigger problem with The Force Awakens, that it leaves too much on 8 and 9 to deliver. Which kind of like my main thesis about the sequel trilogy is that episode 8 is a crap show, but I think a lot of the problems with the Disney trilogy start with The Force Awakens, and I think that's one of them.
Okay, so now we're getting into the dislikes. These are the things that I distinctly disliked about episode 7. A lot of them were things that broke my suspension of disbelief, or that were so egregiously against canon or what I thought I knew about canon that, again, it had mostly to do with circumstances during the course of the movie that broke my suspension of disbelief, which is something that I do not like when I'm watching a movie. I do not like meta commentaries. I do not like, let's not beat around the bush. Basically, I don't like what Rian Johnson did with episode 8. And even though we are going to do a full episode on episode 8, where there are in fact things that I like in episode 8, overall, I think that it, more than anything else, episode 8 is the thing that affected my ability to like the sequel trilogy the most. I'll say that. So for the first dislike when it comes to specifically The Force Awakens, Rey is way too OP right off the top. So you can start with the fact that she was able to pilot the Falcon the way she did in that initial chase. So for as cool as the chase was, it was completely ridiculous that she was able to fly the Falcon and then escape those TIE fighters and get up into space, only to be found by Han Solo 2 minutes later without blowing herself up.
You can start even before that, when she beats the crap out of the 4 guys who were trying to mug her. I mean, 2 guys or whatever. Yeah, there are 2 guys. The 2 guys trying to mug her. You juxtapose that with Luke Skywalker, who gets attacked by one Tusken Raider and needs Obi-Wan to come save him.
Yes, but at that point, I was willing to accept that her knowing how to use her staff because she was alone and had to fend for herself, as opposed to growing up with an aunt and uncle who took care of him. So maybe he was a little soft around the edges, but more or less, was...
You can tell when he's going into the cantina that he's putting on this air of just like puffing his chest out, because he's very clearly not supposed to be there. He is a farm boy,
19-year-old at a college bar.
Yeah, it's like, well, I don't want a problem with you. My buddy doesn't like you. He's just like, you can tell on his face. He's like, shit, I don't know what to do here. Like,
well, I think even when he says walking into the bar that I think when he says that he's ready for anything, that it's very full of false bravado.
Absolutely. Okay, so Rey is OP, starting with her flying the Falcon, and then I think the most egregious thing is the mind trick.
Yep.
The mind trick that she pulls on the James Bond stormtrooper is ridiculous. And specifically, the suspension of disbelief is broken because if you are a Star Wars fan, there is a very specific episode of the Clone Wars where Ahsoka is, I believe she is tasked with going to Mandalore and working with a group of kids to talk about like civic duty or learning about government or something like that.
It's like the kids of the kids and relatives of the ruling class, and they're sort of like,
it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, either way, there's a conversation at the beginning of the episode where she specifically talks about after having practiced it for long enough, she finally feels like she's ready to practically employ using the Jedi mind trick. So if it's the kind of thing in the old Republic era or in the era where the Jedi were plentiful, that something like the Jedi mind trick was something that needed to be practiced and learned, and there's trial and error even for somebody who's adept with the Force. The fact that Rey just knows how to do it is a little silly.
If Force download isn't on this list, I'm going to be mad. I'm just saying.
So I don't think I put specifically
it's the novelization. It's mentioned in the novelization. It's not.
That's probably but I'm saying because it is the given explanation, it's technically
right.
The movie.
So I didn't put it specifically in my notes as a thing I disliked because I didn't necessarily. It wasn't even a thing that I liked or disliked, and it also was a thing that didn't get specifically mentioned other than in the book. So I guess technically in this case, it doesn't qualify as something I could like or dislike in the movie because it wasn't actually in the movie. So if you're only watching the movie, you have no idea why she's able to perform the Jedi mind trick. If you read the book, you find out that when Kylo Ren interrogated her and he entered her mind using the Force, that she was able to fight back, and in the midst of their minds being merged through the Force, she quote unquote downloaded all of his Jedi training. So that obviously plays into later in the movie when she faces off against him, when she finally accepts the Skywalker lightsaber as her call to action, if you think that there actually is any level of maintaining the Campbell hero's journey narrative. But yeah, so the main point, the thing that I dislike, regardless of Force downloads or anything else, is that Rey is what appears to be exceptionally overpowered for no other reason than to just be, as if you watch YouTube and you like the channel Doomcock, the bestest ever at being a Jedi right off the rip. And we're not even going to get into the fact that she's a girl or that's why we care, because if you actually like Star Wars, you know that during the conceptual phase of the original movie, George did consider making the main protagonist a female.
Also, in the original plan for when Return of the Jedi was still Revenge of the Jedi, Luke's sister wasn't going to be Leia. It was going to be, I think, Kira Skywalker, and she was going to be more powerful in the Force than Luke was, and Luke was going to have to grapple with that.
Yeah, Luke was going to go find his sister, who was more powerful than he was, because she had been hidden further away in the galaxy, etc.
Everyone's had a Lindsay.
Hello, Lindsay.
Hi, Lindsay.
Hi.
So anyway, all right. So Rey's OP. The next thing that I dislike, I listed it as mixed signals on Finn. Now, there's several things about that. that I think fit here. The first of which is he's a child soldier who's taken from his family. He's incapable of shooting at civilians. And then 10 minutes later, when he's helping Poe escape a Star Destroyer, he's more than capable of machine gunning guys that he probably had lunch with 2 hours earlier in the Star Destroyer commissary while they're trying to escape in a TIE fighter.
And that's an issue that I had, and I know you're going to be upset at me with this, but I wrote my version of Episode 7, what the things I would have done, and in my version of Finn, because Finn is in the version, he gets captured by the New Republic. They interrogate him. They ask him where the First Order is operating out of, and Finn says, and Finn does defect and become a good guy. And he says, "I will tell you only on the condition that when you attack, you set your blasters to stun." I think that solves a big problem with that, because they were trying to make the stormtroopers seem like less of expendable goose stepping minions. But when Finn goes, but when Finn exclaims in glee at shooting them all in a TIE fighter, it kind of ruins that message.
Yeah, it definitely jumps back and forth, because he just went from being conflicted about shooting at a villager to being totally okay with decimating an entire hangar of his coworkers. You know?
And they you sort of saw them try to address this, at least indirectly, in Episode 9. You know, when he runs into that group, when they run into the group of fellow deserter troopers that were orphans just like him, and it's sort of ham-fisted.
One of the interesting things that was done in Episode 9 to help, quote unquote, fix the story was to introduce more child soldiers who had escaped the First Order. In this particular instance, in Episode 9, the character Jannah, she has a conversation with Finn inside of the Millennium Falcon while they're busy repairing it, where she explains, after handing him a replacement part, which clearly is shiny and new, it came from a First Order ship, the same one that we escaped from. They have this dialogue back and forth where you find out that because of the news of Finn defecting, creating ripples through the First Order, other stormtroopers decided to follow suit, and apparently an entire company of them, Jannah included, decided not to fire when they were told to, and then took their landing craft and escaped to, in this particular case, the ocean moon of Kef Bir, which was the moon of Endor that the largest chunk of the destroyed Death Star 2 landed on. Then again, is it too little too late? Yeah, I guess. I think that the inclusion of Jannah in Episode 9 and her backstory is actually kind of cool.
I think where like the ambiguous conversation with between her and Lando at the end is like, is Lando trying to hit on her? Is she his daughter? Like, what's going on there?
I've watched it a few more times, and you can tell that Lando is not hitting on her, but it might be lost in translation based on
that might be his daughter.
Well, it's made more clear in the visual dictionary that at the very least, at one point in the production, she was definitely going to be, and then they decided against it, so they just sort of float the idea without saying it outright. But either way.
I think before we move on, I just wanted to say that I think Finn, you mentioned that Phasma was your biggest disappointment for the episode, and I think Finn might be mine, even though he was treated better in this episode than he was in subsequent episodes. And I think that's just because the Clone War TV show has shown us that the eyes and like the mind and opinions and life of a grunt on the ground can lead to an insane level of storytelling, especially when you contrast it with these force slinging like gods that we're normally following.
Also, keep in mind too that the way he was originally portrayed in the trailers, everyone thought he was going to be the main character. Like, you know, the way that the main trailers were originally portrayed.
How about the poster where he's holding the lightsaber?
Yeah,
everybody thought that he was going to be a Jedi student.
yeah.
You know, or like that him and Rey were going to be Jedi or something.
That's what I thought. That was my impression.
A lot of people had high hopes for Finn becoming a Jedi. The reason why he defected from the First Order is because he was Force sensitive, and the Force, you know, spoke to him and told him that this was the wrong place for him to be, et cetera, et cetera. And then it never really came to be.
I mean, I even think too that we're talking about the hero's journey in Campbell. I think the hero's journey, at least in episode 7, you know, sort of in a bubble, is most strongly emphasized through Finn, because he goes through an actual arc in that, in that movie. He defects, and he wants to run with the Crimson Corsair, and then by the end, he gets the lightsaber and tells Kylo Ren to come get it.
Yep,
that's a hero's journey arc.
Yeah, I would say so. All right, so next thing that I distinctly dislike about The Force Awakens is the fact that Han Solo has returned to his status as not only a smuggler, but a deadbeat smuggler, because the portion of the movie that we discover him in, he is floating above Jakku, where his new ship, I believe it's called the Ervana, gobbles up his previous ship, the Millennium Falcon, because the Ervana is a particularly large cargo ship. Han Solo and Chewbacca are seemingly alone on this enormous ship, because we come to find out that he is in possession of several deadly creatures called Rathtars, which basically look like miniaturized Sarlacc pits, but not in the ground, and they travel by either rolling or using their tentacles.
They're giant green octopus sacks.
They're green, they're red.
See,
right, they're red. I remember them as green for some reason.
Their eyes are green.
There are a few thoughts of that. That Han's portrayal in The Force Awakens inspired that action figure display. We are currently in my little grotto in me and my girlfriend's apartment, where Han has his hand on Jaina Solo, his daughter in the EU's shoulder, because Han's a good dad, and Han wouldn't go and abandon his kids.
Right. So I don't know, Kevin, where you are on this, but I do not like the big step back in character development that Han Solo took in order to seemingly further the narrative of the two new characters that Disney introduced.
But that's the same with basically the rest of the OT characters. I mean, Luke's not a Jedi Master. Leia is effectively a leader of a ragtag group of, for lack of a better word, rebels. I mean, it's the same with everyone.
Sure. But Leia's character is deceptive, though, because she's still considered a general.
Yeah.
She's spoken very highly of right at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
You know, Laura Santeca says, to me, she's royalty. So Leia is treated with a certain level of reverence, where it kind of misdirects you into believing that the original trilogy characters will be treated with respect.
Yeah.
And then you come to find out that they are effectively in the movie, but the movie is not about them.
It's like you could view their mythicization, I don't know if that's a word, of Luke Skywalker as like respectful. But if you aren't sure a guy that would live 30 years ago was ever real to begin with, that's kind of disrespectful. Well, Jesse Owens was so fast, he must have been a myth.
It's see how they handle that is a little strange, right? Because the in-universe canon response to why somebody like Rey would refer to Luke Skywalker as a myth is because technically the Empire was in charge of the media during the time of the Galactic Civil War. So the potential for propaganda to be prevalent is obviously assumed. You know, they even start to show that a little bit more in the cartoons where you know the HoloNet is controlled by the Empire, and outside of sports, you know, when you see that in the Outlander bar, outside of sports, you basically get state-sponsored propaganda news.
Mm-hmm.
So something that the enemy is not going to do very often is bring up highlights of battles that your greatest hero might have taken part in. So the potential for Luke Skywalker to be mentioned almost never on state-sponsored television, because as far as they were concerned, he was, you know, a very high up member of a terrorist organization, is high. So the fact that Luke would be spoken about in sort of mythical terms because you didn't actually hear about him in standardized broadcasts, I guess I could see from the perspective of somebody who was on an outer rim planet who got news basically third hand through, you know, space junk traders and stuff like that. The fact that you would think a major player in the Galactic Civil War is a mythical character, even though you know functionally that the Rebel Alliance defeated the Empire and that the New Republic is what took over afterwards, you may not know as the average galactic citizen what actually occurred to create those changes. So it's one of those things where you have to remember when you're watching these movies that you are getting the inside perspective on everything, and that not everyone in the Star Wars universe knew that Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon fought a Sith Lord to the death at the Theed power generators, which resulted in the death of Qui-Gon and then the assumed death of the Sith Lord.
I agree with what you're saying functionally, and one thing I do like about how Disney has handled the canon is how they portray the Jedi almost as like ivory tower folk. I think that's overall fairly well done. That said, you can't say I thought Luke Skywalker was a myth, and then when you run into Han Solo, you know, when you run into Han Solo, 20 minutes later in the movie, you say, "Oh my God, you're Han Solo." There's a bit of a narrative discrepancy there, and she reacts the same way when she runs into Lando in The Rise of Skywalker. Oh my God,
he doesn't even need to be a smuggler to be there. I'm just like, he could be high up in the command of the new rebellion and simply be transporting prisoners, dangerous prisoners that get loose, and that causes the shenanigans that leads to X, Y, and Z. And maybe he lost there's a way to have him lose the Falcon. There's a way to have him be there with the ship that he has, full of dangerous, possibly homicidal things that cause a wreck that requires their leaving. And then he comes to a planet, and all of this, him being on the outs with Leia, solves nothing. It really doesn't do anything for the story besides make him sad and lonely looking.
No, the only thing that those two being broken up made me feel was sad in a real world way, because again, it suspended my disbelief and it made me think about my own failed relationships. It made me think about like what I would do if I got out of my car and I was walking into a restaurant to like meet you and Jeff or something, and it just so happened that 10 feet across the parking lot, pulling into the space across from me, was my ex-girlfriend that I dated for up to 10 years, and she was also going into the same restaurant to see her friends. Neither of us saw each other until I saw her getting out of her car, and then she sees me, and we do this thing where we stand in the parking lot and we stare at each other because we don't hate each other, but we had no intention of seeing each other. And now, even though we have no intention of talking to each other for any length of time beyond the now
pleasantries,
between the pleasantries that we now must commit to, that we've seen each other, we can now accept that both of our evenings are going to be partially ruined by the fact that we saw the other one, and that we know we're going to be in the same restaurant at the same time. And it's fucking weird. It makes you uncomfortable. And for me, again, particularly sad. Like, I don't like thinking about shit that depresses me about my real life when I'm watching a Star Wars movie. So the fact that Han Solo was a deadbeat and him and his wife broke up because they had a falling out after their son turned into a not Sith Lord, it was just a little too like Maury Povich for me. The thing that I dislike the most, and it's the reason why I made it the specific point, is that I don't like that Han went back to being not only a smuggler, but a shitty one.
Yeah.
Like, literally, the scene is Han just gets done introducing himself to Rey and Finn. Everybody just gets done meeting each other. And then the next thing that happens is two separate gangs show up, mad at Han because he owes them both money. Like, bro, you're almost 70 years old and you can't figure out how to manage your money at this point.
These are young man's mistakes.
Yeah, like they make him seem like a loser.
And he seems more composed as a young man. Like, he seems more composed making young man's mistakes as a young man in the OT.
Yeah, like when he was talking to the two gangs, he was like fumbling and doing like weird old man things with his hands, like counting with his fingers to be funny and shit.
But when he's talking to Greedo, he's like, he's like confident and cool. Like,
yeah, dude, he was ice cold when he was talking to Greedo, and now all of a sudden he's like a futzing old boomer.
Hey, buddy, I didn't do that.
Yes,
you want a Werther's original? I got him in my pocket.
So I wasn't into that. So the next two things that I dislike are technically connected, and you'll know what I mean when I say it. So the first thing that I have an issue with is that there is no state of affairs in the Republic given to us prior to the Starkiller attack, which is what you already brought up. So that there's one part of that, and then the second part of that is that there is no clear rationale for the Resistance being separate from the Republic Navy.
Well, that's just because they needed some sort. Kev?
Yep.
We do this, Kev.
What? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I don't know.
Yeah, I can hear you guys fine. I can hear you guys. Hello?
Yeah.
I can hear you now.
Yeah, I can hear you. I'll edit that out, so it's fine.
All right. So anyway, so what I was gonna say is that there's no, well, what Ed said, there's no narrative reason as to why the Resistance is separate from the rest of the Republic Navy.
Correct.
Again, so many of the plot points in The Force Awakens, they just like. Here's the thing, right? Like the thing as a writer, you can never like if you show your hand as a writer behind the movie, that's bad, and that's what a lot of these plot points feel like in the OT and also The Force Awakens is you can tell what the writers behind the scenes are trying to do, and that's almost always indicative of bad writing. And you could tell what they were trying to do with the Resistance is that they were trying to shoehorn some way to make them overpowered by the First Order.
Spin it again.
God damn it!
I can hear you guys fine.
this shit straight.
It's not Kevin's fault, you ninny.
I know.
I can hear you guys fine.
Oh, well, it's showing.
Yeah,
like,
no. Sometimes the visual cops out. So long as I'm seeing everything, you're moving fine. You're sounding
Okay,
fine.
so you heard the point that Jeff made?
Yeah, the whole thing.
Okay. All right, so that's basically how I feel. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that Leia and the Resistance have become this separate clandestine part of not the Republic that is still somehow loosely supported by them or potentially only by certain members of the New Republic. And that's why she basically has, even though the X-Wings that we see in The Force Awakens are updates of the original trilogy X-Wings, one of the things that you also find out in the extra material is that the T-70 model, which is the model that Poe and his pilots are flying, you find out that although they are updates of the T-65 that Luke and Wedge fly in the original trilogy, they are in fact older versions of, at least in canon, of the newest X-Wing, which I believe is called the T-85 X-Wing. So technically they're supposed to be older, but they're newer than what we remember, which is why they're new enough. But we have no way of knowing that. We see that they're newer, but we're supposed to figure out through no expository dialogue at all, unless you read a comic or a book, that the X-Wings, although newer than the original trilogy X-Wings, are older than the ones being used by the Republic Navy, and these are surplus from the intervening years when the New Republic first took over as the power in the galactic universe. That's just too much. It's ridiculous and stupid. It makes it incredibly convoluted. And even though I said that I wasn't going to be negative just for the sake of being negative, honestly, the Resistance, the whole concept of the Resistance is dumb as shit. And it was just so that they could justify being on like a hidden jungle planet where they're still having to like dig into the earth to make bunkers and stuff.
The Not Rebellion.
So basically, the Not Rebellion would look like they're on Not Yavin 4, but we would feel like the Not Rebellion was on Not Yavin 4, and that's all that Disney cared about. But with that being said, the next thing that I did not like was there was no explanation of Maz having Luke's lightsaber. Now, at the time, her line, "A good question for another time," was funny. A little bit. It was funny because I said to myself, well, maybe later in the movie we'll get an answer, or maybe in one of the subsequent movies we'll get an answer, or at worst in the comics we'll get an answer.
Well, we did get an answer.
Up to this point, we've gotten nothing except in the current run of the Star Wars comics, there is an unknown Jedi who apparently catches the lightsaber after Luke's hand is lopped off in Bespin. And as of right now, the comic that actually shows that Jedi or who really has the lightsaber has not been shown yet. So as of right now, Luke has been having visions of this faceless Jedi holding his lightsaber, but we, as of yet, have to get his identity or her identity. So we have no idea who it is, but the way that they're drawn in the comics is meant to depict that it's apparently a Jedi who escaped Order 66 and just happened to be hanging out on Bespin, didn't get involved with the actual narrative of The Empire Strikes Back, but somehow was in a position to catch Luke's lightsaber when his hand got chopped off in the battle with Vader. So I have no idea what's going on with that right now, but I can tell you that the throwaway line of a good story for another time would have been funny if before the end of the fucking trilogy, another time had come up and we got to hear the story. So moving on from that.
Real quick. You're coming in a bit choppy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to boot you from the stream, and then you just hit the link that I sent you again, and that should be fine. All right.
Okay.
All right. Sorry about that, folks. We'll be right back.
Hello, Kevin.
All right, that sounds better.
Okay, so getting back to the list, the last point was that I did not like no explanation of Maz having Luke's lightsaber. We've already mentioned this prior in the things that I liked, but I guess technically I'll just bring it up now. I dislike that it was not Phasma who fought Finn. Now, we already went all the way through who it actually was. It was his squad mate, but you needed to read a book to know that, blah, 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 blah. The reason why I wanted Phasma to fight Finn is because, again, her aesthetic was amazing. A gigantic Amazonian woman in a chrome stormtrooper costume with a cape and, well, I guess she didn't have her battle staff until episode 8, but she was awesome. She was a dope character. And again, I don't even watch Game of Thrones, so I don't give a shit about the whole Brienne of Tarth thing. But as far as bringing in a gigantic, angry Amazon, sticking her in a chrome stormtrooper costume and making her in charge of all the stormtroopers, I thought that was rad.
Yeah,
I thought they were going to make her like bloodthirsty, ruthless, or like
they make her to put up a joke at the end when she gets thrown out of
like the type of thing where she's full on picking a guy up by his neck and just like
yes, I thought that Phasma was going to be like over the top vicious, like a real classic Star Wars bad guy. Like she just like shoots people she doesn't like, kind of thing. So
I kind of envisioned her to be revealed to be an alien, and that sort of creates an interesting dynamic with the Empire or the Imperial thoughts on non-human races.
It would have been a cool callback if she were a Chiss. It would have been a cool callback if she was like.
That would have been cool if she had been a female Chiss. You're right.
Right.
So moving on from that, because we already brought it up, I think. Or actually, this final one. There's two final ones, but they're more overarching points. So the first one is I consider the soft reboot of Episode 4 aspect of The Force Awakens the most clear to see during the final sequence that mirrors the Death Star bearing down on the original Yavin 4 base. But it wasn't done as well.
Mm-hmm.
The music, like the whole countdown, and you could feel how the trench run and the Death Star bearing down on Yavin 4, the whole like
stay on target.
And then that like very neutral voice that kept bringing up like how close the Death Star was to like making it around the orbit of the planet to actually get into range to shoot Yavin or to shoot Yavin 4. The tension that was built up in that scene is absolutely still to this day unmatched.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing.
Also, just like the sounds of the Death Star are so weirdly ominous, like the doom.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, Ben Burt is, again, I mean, I'd call him an unsung hero, but all proper Star Wars fans know who Ben Burt is. Ben Bird is an absolute genius, and the sound design that he brought to Star Wars, um, you know, it's definitely a major part of what makes Star Wars so. The sound of it being lived in, like the fact that it's not everything's not a space sound. You know, the fact that he used organic sounds and he mixed the sounds of elephants and bears and tigers to make an alien sound. The fact that he would use mixing an F1 car with a 4-cylinder with an 8-cylinder, but he would, he would blend the sound to make a specific type of like the X-Wing engine, and then the TIE Fighter engine sounds another way, and et cetera, et cetera. The sound design of everything in A New Hope, but then specifically the way that the music was tied to the inevitable countdown aspect of the Death Star has cleared the planet. The Death Star has cleared the planet. And like the way that the camera was cutting back and forth to the people in the war room and Leia, and then back up to the Death Star, absolutely unmatched.
There was a degree of urgency.
There was definitely a degree of urgency that even after watching it literally thousands of times, I still get a charge out of watching the trench run when I watch A New Hope, the same way like I'm a little kid. It's the best feeling in the world.
You get the sense that, like, by the end of that one movie, you're at the end of what normally it would take a trilogy of movies to get to thematically.
Yes, and that was the point of episode 4, because they didn't know if it was going to do well, and if it didn't, George wanted to have at least that one movie be a complete story that somebody could go back to at any time and enjoy on its own. With that being said, I think that the way that The Force Awakens attempts to take the elements of the final battle of episode 4 and then to keep it fresh, try blending in elements of the episode 6 Death Star battle, because they basically combined going down the trench with flying into the Death Star. So on the first Death Star battle, they had to fly down the trench and fire into the thermal exhaust port. In the second Death Star battle, they fly into the Death Star superstructure and go all the way to the main reactor at the core of the Death Star, and then shoot the main reactor, and then have to fly back out of the Death Star while the ball of flame is chasing them down the corridor. So when Poe was able to fly down the trench and then into the hole that was blasted by Chewie and Han, and then fly inside the oscillator and shoot the inside of the oscillator, they combined the first and the second Death Star battle into one, and then made Poe like the super pilot hero. But it was too busy. There was just too much going on. You didn't know where the enemies were. Like there was literally too much on the screen. It became, to a degree, gobbledygook. And then when Poe flew inside the oscillator and blew up the rest of the oscillator and then flew back out, there just wasn't. It just didn't flow as well as previous battles. And the fact that it didn't flow as well as the previous 2 battles that I'm comparing it to, considering that it was literally those 2 previous battles mushed together, doesn't say much for it. And then again, I find Poe not to be the most exciting character in the world. He's a cool pilot. He says cool pilot stuff, but he's not exactly compelling as a character.
He's like, if Han Solo didn't need to be convinced of anything and just started as a rebel pilot.
He's Han without the York kind of.
Yeah. So, all right. So this brings us to our final point, And I think this is something that starts in Force Awakens, and then you realize as a result of these movies being the Disney version of Star Wars, that you quickly realize that this particular point is never going to come to fruition. And that particular point is that there are no major injuries from violent lightsaber combat, and that is directly due to the fact that Disney simply could not allow the female protagonist to be harmed
or her hand cut off.
Or have her hand cut off. So instead, they decided to give the grievous injury to Finn. And even though you assume that when Kylo Ren cuts him up across from the hip to his opposite shoulder with his lightsaber, that it perhaps, oh, I don't know, severed his spine or just generally fucked him up pretty good, that less than 12 hours in a Bacta tank and a sewing kit was enough to get him back to normal. The Bacta tank was for Finn, the sewing kit was for his jacket, and by the beginning of The Last Jedi, he was fine again.
So it's
he should have been in a wheelchair for The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
He should have been in a Professor X floating wheelchair. He should have had his spine severed by that lightsaber.
Yeah, and wow. I think honestly,
Ed just wants to see a minority crippled on screen.
See, but there you go.
But see, that goes to the overall point. Like, Disney's trying to, do a female empowerment thing with these Star Wars movies, but by handling a female protagonist with baby gloves, which is basically what they did, they're doing the very thing that they were accusing past writers of their poor handling of female characters of doing. If you want to have a cool female protagonist, you gotta treat her as you would a cool male protagonist. You gotta have her go through that arc, or else she'll just feel fake and shoehorned and shitty.
Yep. So now that was my final dislike point. I disliked the fact that nobody was grievously injured, and that the one person who was technically grievously injured, we find out in the next movie that he was in fact not.
Not just him, actually. Not just him. Kylo Ren was scarred in the face, and it heals by the end of the second movie.
Yeah.
By episode 9, is force with him goes away.
You'll notice one of the things that I mentioned, or one of the things that I didn't mention, was the final battle, because there are a lot of things that I liked about it, but there's also a lot of things that I disliked about it, and at the end of the day, they effectively neutralized each other. So I understand all of the points made about why some people don't like that fight, up to and including the fact that even though Kylo Ren had been shot by a bowcaster, he still should have, decimated Rey. But then you get the counterpoint that, well, she had just downloaded all of his force abilities, so that means that
which is a dumb plot
it's a dumb plot device, but at the same time, you at least have some recognition for why she might be able to handle herself with the lightsaber, between the fact that she does have some knowledge of melee weapons, even though a bow staff is not a lightsaber, and the fact that she, quote unquote, downloaded his abilities when she let the force in that protracted scene when their sabers are crossed, and he says, "You need a teacher. I can show you the ways of the force." When she responds by saying, "The force," and she closes her eyes, and there's that really overly long segment where you're supposed to realize she's letting the force flow through her. I mean, there are certain aspects of that battle that I think are really cool. One of them, I think, was potentially unintended, but has now become a retroactive point that people are going to bring up once we get to episode 9. the fact that in the battle, Rey does a particular move with a lightsaber that very much looks like the way that Palpatine fights with a lightsaber,
Mhm.
I think is something that was unintended, but upon review, realized could be capitalized on in the story building of her being a Palpatine in Episode 9.
Well, there were theories that Rey was a Palpatine, and there was right after episode 7 came out, and they used that scene as the main proof.
Yes. And
Wait, is it sort of when she goes? Is it when she goes like drunken master a little bit?
When she does the stabby move.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Joseph Scrimshaw refers to it as the stabby move. But you know exactly the one I'm talking about, where she does the forward thrust with the lightsaber. And that's something that really only Creamy Sheep had done in previous installments of lightsaber combat. So when we get to episode 9, we will have a discussion about not necessarily Palpatine. We will talk about Palpatine being in the movie, but specifically how Rey could be related to Palpatine, but not have him in the movie, because that's something I would have been willing to explore. Like, I would have been willing to find out that she is a Palpatine, but have it come somehow other than because Palpatine himself told her. But we'll get there.
Yeah.
Either way, those are my likes and dislikes for episode 7.
It's very sort of hack to do this, I suppose, but I think a good sort of exercise and sort of like in as neutral a way as possible, since we're trying to be more positive, just because the dialogue around these movies can be a bit one note in negativity. And that's not to dissuade any of the good arguments that some of the more negative people have made. At this point, what sort of grade? I don't know what kind of grade system we would use, but like when I say grade, what's your initial reaction to grade this movie? Is it like A, or is it a number?
I think it's the best of the sequels. I give it a C-.
See, I think it is the second best of the sequels, and I would give it a C.
You're brain damaged, though, and we'll get to that when we get to episode 9.
Yeah, but again, the reason why I'm saying it the way I am is because I frankly do not accept these movies as part of the official canon. I think that these movies were Disney's attempt to capitalize on the goodwill of a community. I think that The Force Awakens was an attempt it was basically the use of nostalgia was more misplaced than well placed. They could have used nostalgia really well, and they could have used nostalgia in a way where it gave basically, for me, the fact that the original big three were kept separated, their roles, for all intents and purposes, minus Leia, were minimized to the point of regression. As the 3 movies unfold and you realize what Disney did, I can't help but do anything with these movies other than view them as fan fiction. But fan fiction, I feel, would have taken more care to be appropriate with the legacy characters.
So I can tell you what it is. It's a Disney theme park ride in the form of a movie. You step into the shoes of of a young hero. You discover you're very powerful in the Force. You beat Darth Vader Jr. in a lightsaber battle. You meet Luke Skywalker. Oh my God! You all of a sudden know more about the Force than Luke Skywalker, who's now this old curmudgeon. Oh my God! Oh my God! Um, the Emperor's back. And I and now you gotta go fight the Emperor in a Force Lightning Kamehameha battle. Like that's literally what it is. It's a Disney theme park ride in the form of a movie.
Yeah.
Although, and I think that we've seen enough really faithful fan films, whether it's like Rebel Scum from Blood Brothers Cinema, or all the stuff that Jamie Costa, friend of the show, is doing. You know, like his Obi-Wan short is just lighting up everybody, and
Like
he's jumping on these characters before Disney is. You know, his Han Solo short beat the Han Solo movie. Obi-Wan beat the official Obi-Wan TV show. And you know, like these are passionate people that want to get content out there, and in a way they're being more faithful than Disney. But again, that's straying into negative. Just to throw my 2 cents in, I enjoyed the movie more than I thought I would have, especially given all the context. I did have to kill the part of my brain that remembers what happens in order to enjoy it. But I would give it a D plus.
all right,
Yeah.
all right,
And that's only because I have to look at these movies as part of canon, just because that's what they unfortunately are. So by that metric, if not, then on their own it'd probably be a C. But
Okay.
yeah, I think D plus, and it's probably the best of the three. I don't know if we're gonna go over Rogue One and the anthology films.
We can, but for right now, we're going to do the sequel trilogy, and then go from there. So our next episode will be our constructive criticism of Episode 8, The Last Jedi.
That's gonna be.
I have quite my notes for Episode 8 are a bit more extensive, and again, just for anybody who plans on listening, this is not going to be 3 grown men bitching and moaning. This is going to be the best attempt that we can make at a constructive criticism, which will include a relatively robust list of things that I like about The Last Jedi. There's a ton of stuff that I don't like. There's some major elements that basically make the movie, you know, not necessarily unwatchable for me, but you know, I don't really get a big kick out of watching The Last Jedi, specifically for a few reasons that are on my list that we will go over. But again, I do have plenty of things that I do like. We will discuss those things, and we will try to be as constructive about the things that I don't like as humanly possible, while still getting the unbiased opinions of Jeff and Kevin, at least by me. I will not be coercing anyone to be any more positive or negative about anything. The only thing that I'm asking is that we don't get into ad hominem attacks where we're calling Kathleen Kennedy a bitch, because we've never met the woman. She might be a bitch, but that has nothing to do with what we feel about how Luke Skywalker's character was handled. So next episode will be the breakdown of Episode 8.
The deconstruction of the deconstruction of Star Wars.
Yeah, the deconstruction of the inversion of Star Wars. So it'll probably get weird. It'll probably go at least 2 hours, because we just broke 2 hours here.
It depends if the quarantine's still active or not.
Oh yeah, at that point, if they've set up like block by block checkpoints, Jeff and I'll have to end up like running over backyard fences and going under sewers to like get from one place to the other. It'll be
also
it'll be like the actual French resistance.
if all three of us have gone that long without doing jiu-jitsu, I feel like we're probably going to be a bit more angry than we should be.
I've been doing a lot of push-ups and kettlebell squats.
All right.
So I've been attempting to burn off some excess energy and calories so that I can justify food consumption and sleep. But yeah, I would imagine by next week, if we haven't gotten at least one training session in, that yeah, hopefully our frame of mind collectively will be in a place where we can approach The Last Jedi in a way where you can enjoy listening to us as opposed to being horrified for our mental health. But we'll see.
All right.
Just opening up. All right, fuckers. We haven't done anything physical in a week, and you're gonna get it.
Yeah,
You're gonna get all of it.
I got problems, and you're gonna hear about it. All right.
Yeah.
So for Jeffrey and myself, for Calamity, for Lindsay, who got home from work and was kind enough to allow us to finish our episode. This is Ed Scissorhands Burbridge signing off from the Emperor Experience. If you are not on target yet, I need you to get on target and then stay on target.
Stay on target.